what you say is 100% correct. It's clearly a class war. It always has been a class war. Anyone who's read Chomsky knows already that the important thing is that the government is in the way of big businesses' ability to totally control everything.
Yep.
Only the government is big enough and powerful enough to counter them. So by controlling the government or minimizing the government, it clears the field for them to do what they want to do. My problem with all of this is why the Democrats, which is supposed to be the party of the working man, party of the poor, why haven't they countered this? Why have they allowed this to go on for 40 or 50 years, like you say? We're basically unrepresented as long as the Democrats are run by these
by the same forces, the same people. Here's what happened, Steve. Reagan became the champion for this in 1980, and at that point in time, Jimmy Carter was flirting with neoliberalism, but by and large, the Democratic Party was still the party of organized labor. A third of America had good union jobs, and that was the principal source of funding for the Democratic Party. 8 years later, or really 12 years later, by the end of the Reagan and Bush administrations, union membership in America had gone from about a third down to around 10%, 10 or 11%. It had collapsed. And along with it had collapsed the funding for the Democratic Party. At the same time, the oil shock had worn off by 1982. We had 11.5% inflation in 1981, and it was down to 3% in 1982. Now, the reason for that was because the Arab oil embargo of 1973, 74, that is what produced that 8 years of inflation. And by that time, by 82, it had kind of wrung itself out of the economy. But Reagan got the credit for that. And so all these neoliberal policies of free trade and gutting unions and ending welfare as we know it and tough on crime policing, all those Republican and neoliberal policies were actually very popular in the late 80s. And so when Bill Clinton came along in 92, he just adopted them. The Democratic Party got in bed basically with the same billionaires, not necessarily the same because the Democrats wanted to be with clean industry like tech, and banking and insurance and leave the poison industries, steel and chemicals and pesticides and weapons manufacturing, leave that to the Republicans. That was the equation that they made in the 90s. So, we had a decade and a half or so, or 2 decades, where the Democratic Party was as tightly embracing neoliberalism as were the Republicans. And Joe Biden is the first Democratic president since Jimmy Carter to reject neoliberalism. And so we're in the process, the Democratic Party, of walking back from that poison, not drinking that poison anymore, not drinking that Kool-Aid anymore. But we still have people like, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema who are there, who are taking money from the same people.
Right, they're holdovers, but that is the only chance we have is for people. I mean, Biden is basically a moderate himself, but hopefully he's seen the importance of giving the progressives more power, because that's really the only thing that can combat the corporatists and the big business. And the Republicans have always been better organized, and they're great at executing their plans because they're desperate. They need to be. They know they're a minority, and they know they need to be better. The Democrats need to counter that and put their numbers to work, because that's what our advantage is. We have more people than they do.
I agree, and I think that the other advantage Republicans have is that the Republican Party, as is the case with conservative parties all over the world, is more attractive to people who are authoritarian followers, which is about 20% of any population. People just they are perfectly willing. In fact, they're anxious to surrender their personal will and power to an authority figure. And that's why the old saying, Republicans fall, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. And
Democrats need better PR.
I'm with you. Steve, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. You said it very, very well.